You've been told your whole life to control your emotions, to breathe, to think positive, don't react, and yet you're still reactive. You're still overwhelmed. You're still making decisions that you regret the next morning. Because here's what nobody told you. You were never taught how emotions actually work. Not once. Not in school, not at home, not anywhere. And because of that missing education, most people spend their entire lives fighting a battle they don't understand. Literally against an enemy that was never the enemy to begin with. So today, that changes. So let me start with something that might genuinely surprise you. There's no such thing as a bad emotion. I know it sounds wrong. It probably feels wrong because you felt jealous, you felt rage, you've felt fear so sharp that it stopped you cold. Those don't feel like neutral things. They feel like problems. But here's what decades of psychological research actually shows us. Those feelings aren't your enemy. They're information. So emotions evolve for a reason, every single one of them. They're your nervous system's attempt to communicate something important to you about your environment, about your relationships, about your values, and what matters to you most. So anger isn't a character flaw. It's a signal that something feels unjust. Anxiety isn't weakness. It's a signal that something matters to you. Jealousy isn't something to be ashamed of. It's a signal pointing towards something you want to build or you want to become. I want you to think about that last one. You get anxious before a presentation. So most people would tell you to calm down, suppress it, push through. But what if your anxiety is just your nervous system saying, this matters to me. I care about how this goes. I don't want to waste this moment. That's not a problem. That's fuel. So the problem was never the emotion. The problem is that nobody has ever taught us what to do with it. So here's a question. Think back to your entire education. So every class, every teacher, every conversation with a parent. How much time was spent teaching you how to deal with your emotions? So I found this research where scientists have surveyed thousands of people across the world. So high performers, business leaders, teachers, students, kids, and only 10% of them said they learned anything about this growing up. And only 5% said they learned it at school. So that means that 9 out of 10 people right now, listening to this, watching this, are navigating the most complex, high-stakes part of being human, which is your inner life, completely untaught. So you learn math, you learned history, you learned a parallel park, theoretically. But nobody sat you down and said, here's how emotions work. Here's why your body responds the way it does. Here's what to do when you're so angry you can't think straight. And so what did you learn instead? You learned by watching your parents, which means that you inherited their strategies, which were more than likely good and bad. Maybe you learned to go quiet when things got hard. Maybe you learned to explode. Maybe you learned to work more, eat more, scroll more, anything to not be in the feeling. I know for myself, I really learned when I was younger to shut down when emotions got too big. I learned that from my parents. One of my parents also was full of rage. So I learned when emotions felt too much and were out of control just to let them out. I had to unlearn that one pretty quickly. All right, so here's the painful irony. All of those avoidance strategies, so running from emotions, it doesn't shrink them. It doesn't make them go away. It amplifies them. So the emotion that you refuse to feel doesn't go away. It goes underground. And from there, it keeps running your decisions. It's sitting there quietly, invisibly, every single day. So you're not free of it because you stopped looking at it. You've just stopped seeing it coming. So if the goal isn't to suppress emotions, and it isn't, what is the goal? The goal is skill. And skill starts with a map. So there's a framework that's used in thousands of schools and organizations worldwide, built on decades of research, that breaks down emotional intelligence into 5 learnable skills, 5 steps. And when you build them in order, they compound on each other in a way that changes how you move through the world. This is the work of Mark Brackett, who I really like, who really works with emotions. So here they are. The first one is recognize. All right. So the first skill is simply noticing that you're feeling something. I mean, this sounds obvious, doesn't it? But most people go through their days without even pausing to ask, what am I actually feeling right now? When I bring people into my small group coaching, one of the things that we often do is we do a check-in for how we're feeling. The reason that we do that is so often there are multiple people in a class who will have no idea how they're feeling. Okay? So it's absolutely fine if you don't know what you're feeling, but a really good skill is to start to learn to identify what you're feeling. And often when people are in those groups, they'll say, I feel good. And I will say, good is not a feeling. It is not a feeling. So learning how to be in touch with your feelings is a big thing, because we're operating on autopilot. We're reacting, we're moving, we're producing, but we're never pausing to check in with what's actually happening inside. So if we can learn how to recognize our emotions, recognition is the moment before we react. So it's the pause. This gives us the chance to make a choice, because without it, you're not making decisions. Your nervous system is making them for you. So the step number 2 is to understand. So this is the skill of asking why. Not just I feel anxious, but why do I feel anxious right now? What triggers this? What's actually at stake? So understanding connects the emotion to its cause. And once you can see the cause clearly, the emotion loses some of its charge. So it stops being a fog and starts being a fact, something that you can actually work with. Now, this step is important because it also protects you from something that researchers call incidental emotional leakage. So where an emotion from one area of your life bleeds silently into a completely unrelated decision. We know this, right? You've had a fight at home in the morning, and 3 hours later you're in a meeting and you're harsher in your feedback to someone than you would normally be, and you don't even know why. But when you trace that emotion back to its actual source, then you can contain it. You stop letting it contaminate everything else. So step number 3 is to label. This is where most people are dramatically under-equipped, and it matters more than almost anything else. So research shows that the more precisely you can name what you're feeling, the better you can regulate it. Scientists call this emotional granularity. It's that gap between low granularity and high granularity, all right? And that gap is usually enormous. So here's a real example. Stress, anxiety, fear, pressure, overwhelm. Most people use these words interchangeably, but they describe completely different experiences with completely different causes and completely different solutions. So let me explain that to you. Anxiety is always about the future. So you're predicting something will go wrong. Stress is too many demands, and when you don't have enough resources to meet those demands. Fear is an immediate present danger in front of you right now. And pressure is something important that's riding on your performance. And overwhelm is emotional saturation. You're simply full. So these are like a family of feelings, but they're very different characters. Now, here's why this matters on a practical level. If you're anxious about a presentation 3 months from now and you call it fear, you're going to try and escape it. You might cancel. You might avoid preparing because preparation forces you to confront it. You might self-sabotage because the instinctive response to fear is to get away from the threat. But if you correctly identify it as anxiety about an uncertain future outcome, now you can take action. You can prepare, you can rehearse, you can build the competence that reduces that uncertainty. So the emotion is pointing you directly toward the solution. One word, the entire strategy changes. So this is also why so many people stay stuck. They're treating the wrong emotion. So they go to a therapist and they say they're stressed and they spend months working on time management when the real feeling was loneliness or grief or a fear of failure that they've never named out loud. So you've got to label it right. Then you know what you're actually dealing with. All right, number 4 is to express. So the fourth skill is knowing when and how to share what you're feeling and with whom. So this doesn't mean oversharing. It doesn't mean making everyone around you the audience for your emotional weather report, which I often see. It means having the vocabulary, the option, the safety to speak the thing accurately when the moment calls for it. So research on what makes someone a genuinely supportive person in another person's life keeps coming up with the same 3 qualities. They're non-judgmental, they actually listen, and they lead with empathy rather than jumping to solutions. So nobody going through something hard wants to be fixed. They want to be witnessed. If you want to be that person for someone you love, your partner, your friend, your child, maybe someone at work, it starts with learning to sit with someone in their emotion without immediately trying to get rid of it, without wanting to make it go away. And the 5th one is to regulate, all right? The word everyone is chasing right now, but here's the trap most people fall into. They're trying to regulate without doing the first 4 steps. So they go straight to the breathing exercise, the cold plunge, whatever it is that you use without ever recognizing, understanding, labeling, or expressing what's actually happened. And that's why it doesn't work. So breathing exercises are real. They do help to deactivate your nervous system. But breathing through an emotion you haven't named is like putting a bandage on a wound you haven't looked at. The breathing exercise is going to buy you time. The work is everything that comes before it. So here's what effective regulation actually looks like in practice. Something happens, right? You feel triggered. Bad email. Maybe there's a difficult conversation at home or something that gets under your skin. And instead of reacting immediately, you pause. So you notice what you're feeling and you trace it to its actual source. And you name it as precisely as you can. And you give yourself what you need. A walk, a workout, 10 minutes quiet, whatever works for you. And then you respond from a place of awareness rather than from inside the storm. So you can make a good decision while you're experiencing any emotion. But the key is knowing you're feeling it and choosing not to let it make the decision for you. So here's something the research keeps surfacing that I think is one of the most important ideas in this entire conversation. All emotions are temporary, every single one. So when you're in the middle of rage or grief or deep anxiety, it doesn't feel temporary. It feels like the air you're breathing. It feels like the atmosphere, like the ground beneath you, like this is just what your life is now. But it isn't. And here's where we create enormous unnecessary suffering, when we confuse a temporary emotion for a permanent identity. So there's a crisis happening right now, particularly among young people, where they no longer say, I feel anxious. They say, I am anxious. So they don't call it a passing state. They call it a fixed self. I'm depressed. I'm broken. I'm an anxious person. I'm someone who can't handle stress. I hear this all the time. And the moment you make that shift from experiencing an emotion to being it, you're literally handing it the keys. And it's driving now. And every decision that you make is getting filtered through it. Every opportunity, you're assessing it through the lens of someone who's already decided they are that thing. So this shift is really subtle, but the consequences are enormous. Because if you are anxious, there's nothing to do except manage it, treat it, medicate it, work around it. But if you feel anxious sometimes, or you feel anxiety sometimes, If anxiety is a passing experience, not a fixed identity, then you've got room, you've got agency, you've got the ability to ask, what is this telling me right now? And what do I want to do with that information? So the research shows something remarkable. Simply shifting from I am anxious to I feel anxious right now measurably changes your relationship to the emotion. It creates distance. It creates choice. You're not your feelings. You're the person having them. So emotional regulation is not just a mental skill, it's a biological one. Your capacity to deal with difficult emotions, so your regulation budget, is directly tied to 3 physical variables: sleep, food, and movement. All right? When you're sleep deprived, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational decision making and emotional regulation, is compromised. You become more reactive, more impulsive, more likely to make decisions from inside the emotion than through it. So studies show that a single night of poor sleep can make you measurably more emotionally reactive the following day. Now, at the same level, when your nutrition is poor, your cortisol rises, your mood destabilizes, and the energy required for the kind of self-awareness we're talking about just isn't available. And the third thing is when you don't move your body, you're not discharging the stress hormones that accumulate through the day. They sit there, they're building, they're waiting for the next small thing to set them off. So here's one concrete thing that you can implement today. Don't process the hardest emotional content of your day right before sleep. So don't revisit any conflicts you had or worries or grievances, because if you do this late at night, it spikes cortisol at the exact moment your body needs it to fall. And that disrupts your sleep. And disrupted sleep depletes tomorrow's regulation budget. So you're going to wake up more reactive than you were yesterday, and that cycle compounds. So process difficult things in the morning or the afternoon. Call the friend then. Have the hard conversation then. Let your evening genuinely wind down. Let your body arrive at sleep with cortisol levels falling, not rising. This isn't a small adjustment. Better sleep really rebuilds that biological foundation that makes every other skill we've discussed actually accessible to you. All right? I want to leave you with something I think is the most important part of all of this. Some of you are carrying real things, not just a hard week or a difficult conversation, actual wounds, experiences from your childhood that have shaped how you see yourself, shaped how you see the world in ways that you're still untangling. No framework erases that. There's no 5-step process that makes the past smaller than it was. But here's what the research keeps returning to, and what the people who have genuinely worked through hard things keep saying, and I am one of them. The goal is to move forward. Don't deny the past. Don't pretend it didn't shape you. Don't perform wellness while the wound is still open, but to actually locate the past correctly in your life. To locate it. To name what it actually did to you, and then slowly, with real work, stop letting it make your present day decisions for you. So there's a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. So the research shows that many people who go through genuinely devastating experiences don't just recover, they develop capacities that they wouldn't have had otherwise. I know this for myself. I have much more empathy than I know I would have if the things hadn't happened to me when I was a child. I'm clearer about my priorities. There's a particular kind of resilience that only comes from having been tested. So this is not about being grateful for your suffering. It's not about, rewriting the story, oh, it was a good thing after all. It's not about pretending the hard things were secretly good. It's about recognizing that what happened to you doesn't have to be the ceiling of what's possible for you. So the people who've moved through the hardest experiences and come out with something to offer, they all share a common thread. They stopped defining themselves by what was done to them, and they started defining themselves by what they chose to do with it. So your past is data, or data, for those of you who tease me about my New Zealand accent. This data informs you, doesn't have to control you. So that shift where you take the past from being a cage to a compass, it's available to you. It takes time, it takes help sometimes, it takes the willingness to feel things you've been avoiding for years, but it's available. So let's bring this home. The mindset shift, the center of everything we've covered today is this. Emotions are not obstacles to a good life. They are the data that helps you build one. Not problems, not weaknesses, not things to be controlled, suppressed, or eliminated, but they're information that's waiting for you to access it, to read it. So here's the practice, as simply as I can put it. Before you react, pause. Notice what you're feeling. Trace it to its actual source. Name it as precisely as you can. Give yourself what you need to move through it, then respond. That's the whole thing. Doesn't happen overnight. Took most of us decades to build the habits we have. And replacing them takes time, repetition, and the occasional spectacular failure. I can really tell you that is the truth. But the direction is available to you right now, today. So give yourself permission to feel, not permission to be consumed, not permission to make everyone around you pay for what happened to you, when you were a child, for what you've gone through, but permission to acknowledge that you're a human being and you're having a human experience, and that what's happening inside you is real and valid and worth paying attention to. That's not softness. That is the foundation of every high-performing, deeply connected, and genuinely satisfying life I've ever encountered. So start there. Don't forget, in the description is the happiness quiz. Go and do the happiness quiz. Make sure you've done it. It's a fantastic way to see where you're at on your path. As always, be kind, take care, go gently in the world.